What happens when machines stop being tools and start becoming workers? Today on Breaking Math, we're joined by Martin Ford, software entrepreneur, futurist, and author of Rise of the Robots. When the book first came out in 2015, it warned that automation would not simply change the way we work. It could reshape the economy itself. And now with the new 2026 edition, that warning feels less like prediction and more like the world we are already living in. I'm your host, Autumn Finef, joined by my co host, Noah John Syracusa. And today we're talking about what happens when machines start being tools and start becoming workers. AI is now writing code, drafting emails, analyzing documents, generating media, and beginning to act like a digital workforce. So the question is no longer could machines replace human labor? It's actually how far has it already gone and what happens next?
All right. So we're here in large part to talk about your book, Rise of the Robots. And this is such an interesting case because your book actually came out about 10 years ago and you're releasing an updated version. And the book was very prescient. It really foresaw a lot of issues we're having around automation, accelerating technology, AI before AI was a big, popular, cool, scary thing. So we kind of want to zoom out and understand, how did you get into this topic? I mean, you're a futurist, so how did you get into it before it was widely recognized to be so important? And also, now that you look back 10 years, where do you see your writing then versus now? What has changed? What has stayed on track?
Right. Before I got into writing and thinking about the future seriously, I was running a small software company. And I actually began to think seriously about this around maybe 2007. And I actually wrote another book even earlier than Rise of the Robots. The title of that book was The Lights in the Tunnel. And that was a self-published book because I couldn't find a publisher. So I published it in 2009, which was just after the financial crisis. So I was certainly thinking then also a lot about unemployment and the advance of technology and so forth. And I kind of put that all together. And I really came to the conclusion that it was basically inevitable that eventually machines, artificial intelligence, robots, other technologies were going to probably displace the majority of the workforce. And when I first started writing about that, back in 2008, 2009, I thought that might be a very futuristic scenario, perhaps 50 years in the future. So after that self-published book came out and got some attention, then I started, I really wanted to write a real traditionally published book. And so that's why I focused on publishing Rise of the Robots. And when that was published in 2015, I still thought, there was more evidence for it then, right? Google had just introduced its first self-driving car and so forth. But still, I thought it was at least a 20-year problem, maybe. But now here we are 10 or 11 years later, and certainly there is some pretty compelling evidence that we're really on the leading edge of this. We don't know that for sure. Economists are looking at the data and they haven't determined yet, is it really happening yet or not? But there are certainly reasons to really wake up and take notice.
And I'll tell our listeners, it was really amazing for me. I didn't read your book 10 years ago when it came out. I just read the current version now. It was really striking that there were some specific details that, maybe didn't age fantastically. One of my favorites was the IBM Watson computer. When you wrote this was poised to revolutionize healthcare and all these things that had just won Jeopardy. And somehow that was an amazing example of a miss in AI. It somehow didn't achieve what it hoped, but it was right at the precipice of other AI that we didn't anticipate coming in. But I don't want to make fun of it. I really thought what was amazing is every now and then there was a specific company that didn't quite turn out the way we thought. And yet the overarching line and the message, everything you wrote there, I felt like is still where we're sitting now. In fact, many of the headlines that are now in like New York Times about the concerns, the fears, what's happening in the economy was in your book 10 years ago. So to me, it aged extremely well in that we are now confronting the issues that you were warning us about 10 years ago. So I was very, really blown away by your impressions on this.
Thank you. You're right. It's not about any specific technology. And it's definitely possible that the same sort of thing could happen with the technologies that we see today. At least in terms of them really reaching human level AI or AGI, right? We don't know yet that the large language model architecture is really what's going to get us there. So it's entirely possible that 10 years from now, we'll look back and it didn't really go the way we anticipated. But overall, the progress is going to be relentless, whether it's this technology or something entirely new that will come up in the next few years.
Something that I noticed in the book was that you kind of paralleled this technological revolution almost to like an industrial revolution, but in another sense, right? So what I've seen here and what a lot of people are talking about in the media, not just only in your book, is that there are particular technological revolutions that are becoming more concerning with work and employment than in previous revolutions. We've had some people say it creates more jobs. In this case, there's less jobs. Can you talk a little bit about that and
Right.
what you discuss
I
in the
mean, this
book?
is really the key debate. And I guess the question that we need to answer is this time different compared to the past? Because it certainly is true that we've had many technological revolutions. The Industrial Revolution was the most prominent. Um, but overall, it did not, lead to unemployment. It did not displace human workers, right? It changed the nature of work. But overall, of course, it made people much better off, right? You had a better job and you were earning much more money. The reason that I feel very strongly that artificial intelligence is different from any other technology that's come before, it is the first time that it is going to, threaten to displace what is really the thing that makes us unique as human beings, right? Which is our intelligence. It's the thing that sets us apart from every other animal on the planet. Our intelligence is the reason that we've been able to adapt to previous revolutions, right? I mean, just a classic example would be agriculture, right? I mean, it used to be in the United States and other countries, the majority of people were working on farms. Then you had agricultural machinery come in, tractors, combine harvesters, and all the rest of it. And now it's maybe something like 2% of the workforce is engaged in agriculture. But of course, that didn't result in mass unemployment, although it did create chaos in the short term. I mean, you had, agricultural workers going to the cities looking for work and so forth. But over time, what happened is other sectors of the economy rose up, first manufacturing, and later, of course, the service sector, and was able to absorb all those workers. And people adapted to it because they have the ability to learn, right, and to adapt. But of course, tractors and combine harvesters did not threaten our core competence, the thing that sets us apart, our intelligence. So AI is going to potentially displace our brains, right? Our ability to learn. AI is going to be able to do all the things that we can do in terms of adapting to new realities. So I think it's going to lead to a different outcome for that reason. And also because it's really turning into a systemic technology, right? AI is not a technology that's going to hit one sector, the way agricultural machinery hit one sector of the economy. AI is going to be like electricity. It will be everywhere. The entire economy, every employment sector, every industry, every organization is going to become highly dependent on this technology. So I think it's going to ultimately be a lot more disruptive.
We could say that nowadays almost every sector is dependent on computers, right? I mean, it's hard to think of a job that doesn't involve a computer in any way. Even agriculture is, lots of things are measured and recorded and communicated. And I would say John Deere, I was reading about this for a data mining class I was teaching. John Deere, I think of it as this very old-fashioned farming company, but it's almost an AI technology company. They use AI to automatically scan and see what's a weed and what's not, how much fertilizer to use. So even the things that seem very far from high-tech are becoming much more technological. But I'm curious, your book is Rise of the Robots, and that robot has a really physical, palpable feeling connotation. And as you were writing it, I think, as you mentioned, self-driving cars was very much on not just the horizon, but on people's imagination. Now, 10 years later, AI is the big buzzword, and certainly self-driving cars and automating a lot of physical things there's a lot of research there. But somehow it feels to me like the psyche has shifted from the physical replacement of humans to this more mental replacement. Do you think that's meaningful, or is it just kind of obvious that most of our work is through typing through computers? Of course, we're automating computer typing.
Well, I mean, the title rise of the robots is tended to interpret that very broadly, right? So it would include physical machines that are robots, and it would also include artificial intelligence and what we would think of as software robots, right? In other words, it encompasses all that. And in fact, at least half of the book focuses on software and AI. So it's both things happening. In general, yes.
So, for instance, what nowadays we often call AI agents, I think you would refer to as a robot, right? It doesn't need a physical body.
Yeah, I mean, an AI agent is still software, right? So it's kind of like a software robot, yes. But certainly the focus right now has shifted not just from physical robots, but certainly to AI as implemented with the large language models. And so the greatest concern right now is really around white-collar jobs and intellectual jobs. And I've always argued in all my books, going all the way back to the first book, that it was foreseeable that those jobs might in many ways be easier to automate, right? Because if you are sitting in front of a computer performing some analysis or some intellectual task, to automate that just requires software or an AI system. You don't need an expensive mechanical machine like a robot, right? And that's why I do think many white-collar jobs are potentially kind of at the forefront of this. But at the same time, it's absolutely true that progress in robotics has also, been amazing, right? Robots are getting much better, especially in environments like Amazon warehouses, where it's a very controlled environment. So both of these technologies, whether it's just AI and software or physical robots, are going to have, I think, a dramatic impact in the future.
Now, you say a lot of predictable work is vulnerable, not just the Amazon warehouses. And that does not just mean low skill or routine work. Now, what other kinds of jobs really are put at risk in this case?
Well, we already are beginning to see an impact on lawyers. I've heard lots of stories of law firms hiring less junior associates, right? Because they can use AI to do a lot of the things that those younger attorneys used to do. Like, for example, doing legal research and creating briefs and analyzing contracts and so forth, like things like that. So yes, very high skilled people, doctors, radiologists, in the long run, I think, attorneys, financial analysts, people, same thing, people working on Wall Street, um, accountants, really just the entire range of what we would call knowledge work, right? Where you've got someone who maybe spends most of their time in front of a computer, manipulating software, analyzing information, writing reports, doing quantitative analysis. All of these things are going to be very, very highly threatened by these systems for sure.
So let's turn to this big debate about whether AI is going to replace people and create massive unemployment versus whether it'll augment what people are doing and basically have every employee therefore produce a lot more value. So just to set the stage a little bit, Ezra Klein put out an op-ed just a few weeks ago in the New York Times saying, actually, he's no longer so worried about massive job replacement. He sees this as the example he gives actually is for his podcast. He said his podcast now, it was just him and maybe one producer many years ago. Now he has a team of 15 or so. I forget the numbers. A lot of people. And he said it's not that he's being replaced by this additional firepower. He can produce more ambitious episodes. He can tackle harder things. So he was just kind of reasoning, well, look, this isn't automation. This is that he has a bigger budget. But he's saying with more resources, I can accomplish more. I do more ambitious episodes. And his op-ed was basically saying, why won't this be the case with everything? That now with AI, a lot of workers can do more and are therefore more valuable. So he actually is less concerned about this. And another data point I'll bring in is the MIT economist and recent Nobel Prize winner, Darren Esamalo, has, I would say, maybe this is oversimplifying it, but a broad argument that technology in the short run can be very disastrous for workers. But in time, there is kind of social uprising that pushes back, and we kind of find a healthy middle ground. So I think he has sort of it's a short-term harm, but a long-term gain for the worker with automation. So what's your thought, and what would you say to these perhaps counter views that maybe it's going to be fine? We'll just all learn how to work with AI.
I think it's entirely possible that Ezra is correct for the time being, and that we will be fine for a few years or the foreseeable future. But I mean, the argument that I've always made is that ultimately ultimately machines are going to get to the point where they can displace most workers. I mean, you think about people in Silicon Valley are talking a lot about AGI right now, right? Um, that
Which you
means
talked about in your book 10 years ago, right?
right,
I mean,
right,
you
right.
were
I mean,
aware of all the
when I
discussions that are
wrote the
happening
book, it
now.
was a very futuristic concept. Most people thought it was, 30, 40, 50 years in the future. Now you've got people saying it might be 3 or 5 years away. But the point I would make is that if we really achieve AGI, I think by definition, what that means is that's got to be at least the equivalent of having an extremely smart person sitting in front of a computer, and this system will have to be able to do anything that that person could do, right? I mean, it can't be the case that, well, we've got this system, it's a good artificial intelligence, but we really need a person looking over its shoulder, or we need, holding its hand, making sure it's not making errors, like micromanaging it if that's the case, then it's not AGI yet, right? So that just means we haven't achieved that. But once we do get there, it gets really harder to see how there's not a big displacement effect, because you literally have got a system that can do anything, at least in the kind of white collar virtual world of manipulating a computer. Um, so I think it is coming eventually. And again, the whole argument is predicated on what I said before, which is that I think this time is different because we're talking about a new resource that has the potential to displace our intellect, right? And it will be the first time in history that has ever happened. So that's what makes it different. So it's entirely possible that for a time, artificial intelligence will continue to be a complement to most people rather than a substitute, right? And it will depend on the kind of job. I mean, if you're a research scientist and you spend half of your time writing grant proposals, right, to get money to fund your research, and now you've got AI that can do that, I mean, that's a massive boost to your productivity. You can now spend all your time in the lab doing experiments, right? So for someone in that kind of role, I think, yes, absolutely. AI is going to be a complement. It's going to amplify their capability for maybe for a long time to come. But suppose you're working in a call center asking customers questions, and maybe you're kind of a mid-level employee, and they give you the kinds of questions that come up again and again, and you're looking at a script on a screen to help answer these questions. I mean, that's something that AI is probably already largely capable of doing. And it doesn't mean that all those people will disappear. You'll have the highest level people who can handle the most difficult problem that in case the problem needs to be escalated. But in that kind of role, you're much more likely to find yourself being threatened by an intelligence that is really a substitute for you rather than something that is going to be a complement and amplify your work. And what I would argue is that as AI gets better and better and scales across the entire economy, there's going to be kind of a tipping point where more jobs flip from AI as a complement to AI as a substitute. And who knows how long that's going to take. It might be years before that happens, or it might happen quite suddenly.
So what about this? Let me try that again. You're mentioning that some people at the top might be well secured economically. You know, the high level jobs will be okay, and more the entry level jobs will be more under threat. But what happens to our whole economy when we lose this access point to employment? So, in other words, if we wipe out the lower rungs, how do we still have a standing ladder?
Right. I mean, that's a big problem, not just economically, but in terms of developing future talent, right? I mean, you if you're in a big corporation, you've got to hire young people and train them, or you're never going to have people at the top, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So that's one issue. As I said, right now, if we really look at the evidence for what's happening, there isn't any strong economic evidence saying that there's a big impact of AI on employment. I think most economists would agree on that, except that there is at least some evidence relatively compelling that entry level jobs are possibly being affected. Or even that, the people looking at the data in detail are debating it, right? I mean, they don't all agree. But my intuition is that over time, as AI becomes more capable, it's not just going to be the entry-level jobs. It will be more experienced workers of all. But again, I couldn't tell you how long that's going to take. It might happen within the next few years. Maybe it's going to take 10 years. Maybe it's going to take 20 years. Anything is possible. And it depends a lot on how this technology progresses, and also how effective businesses are at bringing this technology into, on board. But the thing I do worry about in the long run, if in fact, I'm right about this and this really unfolds economically, of course, the people that are being paid, that are drawing salaries, that are workers, are also consumers, right? These are the people that buy all the products and services produced by our economy, right? And if people don't have an income, they cannot do that. And that's a big problem, especially now that we're beginning to sense that the impact of this could be top heavy, in the sense that it's going to impact higher paid white collar workers rather than lower paid blue collar workers, right? Sort of the opposite of what happened during the pandemic, right? I mean, it's going to potentially, especially if it scales beyond entry level work to more experienced workers, it's going to start coming from people that really make a lot of money. And in the U.S. economy right now, the top 10% of households, which would be households earning at least $250,000, they're responsible for 50% of all the consumer spending in the economy, okay? And that's the primary driver of our economy. So if those people begin to be affected at some point, that's going to be a major, major economic headwind, right? And then there are also the secondary impacts. If you are a high-paid worker and you lose your job, suddenly you can't pay your mortgage, right? And we should remember that the financial crisis back in 2008 started because people couldn't pay their mortgages, right? So this is something I think that needs a lot more attention from economists and policymakers.
So, what are some things that could go into effect? Because we are well aware that the AI driven labor disruption is not exactly being taken seriously. What are some things that we can look at, especially with like universal basic income, and what are people misunderstanding there?
Right. I mean, I think in the long run, again, it's inevitable that as jobs are displaced, we're going to have to come up with a reform to our system, another economic paradigm, really. And in the book, I do argue that a universal basic income is probably going to be at least an important part of that. It may not be the whole solution. And for sure, a basic income is not a panacea. I mean, in many ways, I kind of view it as like the least bad solution because it comes with a lot of problems, right? It's not ideal in many ways, but I think it's probably inevitable that is something we're going to have to consider. But even saying that, it's not easy, right? I mean, again, we are potentially talking about white collar workers who earn a lot of money, losing their jobs. Basic income, all the examples that I've basically seen, the experiments that have been conducted, is generally around $1,000 a month, right? Which, an experienced white collar worker might easily be making 10 times that amount each month. And if their job goes away and now they can't pay their mortgage, $1,000 a month isn't going to do a whole lot, right? But it is also the case that if you're really talking about a universal income we're going to give to, everyone in the American workforce, even at the level of $1,000 a month is staggeringly expensive, probably, $2 trillion a year, something like that. Where's that money going to come from? It has to come from taxation. I mean, we certainly can't borrow more money. I mean, our national debt is already out of control. So we're going to have a new taxation scheme. I think that generally what we're going to need to do in terms of that is we're going to have to shift away from taxing labor, which we do very, very heavily right now, not just income taxes, but payroll taxes that support healthcare and so forth. All of that falls on labor. And as labor potentially in the future becomes, less important, as there is less labor, we're going to have to shift the taxation to capital instead, into business ownership, things like that. I mean, those are general ideas, but really one of my motivations for re-releasing the book and updating the book is to get more people thinking about these issues. I mean, I'm not what you would call a policy wonk, right? Someone that really has experience crafting detailed policies and legislation and things like that. I hope that as this book gets out there, those kinds of people are going to take notice and really begin to think about that, right? Because what I see right now is that the economists really have become interested in this for sure. And that's quite different from 10 years ago when I published this book. The economists were very, very skeptical and not especially interested in this topic. Now they definitely have woken up, but mostly what they're doing is they're looking at the data and they're trying to figure out, is this really happening or not? But from what I see, not too many people are taking the next step and trying to figure out, what do we do if it does happen, right? Which is a huge problem.
So we've been talking about going back 10 years, but can you push us a little further in history? One of the passages in your book that I found really the most striking, because I had no idea, I'll hint at it and see if you know what I'm talking about, I think it was a speech of Kennedy and a report to Congress in 1964 on the very topic we're talking about. So can you fill us in a little bit? What happened back then in the 60s?
Right. It was actually, what I'm referring, there was a sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King. And it was actually, unfortunately, it was his very last sermon that he ever gave, because he was assassinated just a few years later. But in that sermon, he talked about what was then known as the Triple Revolution Report. And this was a report put together by a very high level group of people, intellectuals, economists, scientists, journalists, and so forth. It was like a task force to put this report together. And it basically warned of three things that would be revolutionary, things that were going to really transform our world. And one was the advent of nuclear weapons. The second one was the civil rights movement, right, which at that time was really bringing rapid change. But the third thing, which interestingly has kind of been lost and no one talks about, was automation, was the potential for factories, especially. This is back in the 1960s. So the focus was more on factories to become more and more automated and put people out of work, right? And there was extreme concern about this. And it's just one example of how this issue has come up again and again, right? And it's always, so far, turned out to be a false alarm.
But even in the 60s, didn't you say that they were considering universal basic
right.
income?
Well, this report did propose that, right? And but
which is amazing, right? Because I think of it as sort of like I don't know, maybe a Bill Gates, Sam Altman, Elon Musk, very like modern techie idea. So to think that this was in a policy report in the 60s.
A basic income or a guaranteed minimum income or a minimum or a negative income tax, these are ideas that basically involve giving people money. And they actually have been around for a while. And the interesting thing that might surprise many people is that they were proposed by more conservative people, more conservative economists. So Friedman Hayek, right, who was the guy who wrote the book, The Road to Serfdom, right, who is very much against communism and socialism. He proposed a guaranteed minimum income. Milton Friedman, another very considered right-wing guy, right, an economist, also supported this general idea. And the reason that more conservative or libertarian people support this idea is that rather than having the government, take over everything and seize the means of production as you would have in communism or socialism, what they're saying is, no, just give people money and then let them go out and participate in the market, right? And so it's actually a very market-oriented solution. So maybe that's one thing that's a bit hopeful, is that you can sort of see a way where this idea could appeal to people both on the left and on the right, right? So maybe it does have a chance. But for sure, it's a staggering challenge politically, right? Especially in a country like the United States. But it is an idea that has certainly had conservative as well as liberal support.
Now let's think into the future a little bit more. If individuals are looking at jobs and what they should do to protect themselves, where should they go in the trajectory of AI? Whether that's in creativity, empathy, judgment, instead of just upskilling themselves.
Right. And I don't have a really, groundbreaking answer that is probably more than what most people can figure out with their own common sense. But obviously, one thing is to learn to use AI, right? Certainly, if you're really, whatever you're doing, if you're working, if you're a student, you better be using these systems heavily and really learning how to use them effectively, because that's going to become pretty much a job requirement going forward. Beyond that, in terms of what you're actually doing or what you should be studying, if you're a college student, what I would say is that, there are really three areas where I think humans are likely to remain complements rather than being replaced by AI, where AI is going to be a tool that can amplify what you're doing as opposed to directly replace you. The first area is things that are genuinely creative, right? When you're doing especially more sophisticated things, creating something new, building something that wasn't there before, developing an entirely new strategy. I think in those kinds of endeavors, AI is likely to be a tool that amplifies what you can do, that makes you more powerful rather than simply displace you. Although there are certainly exceptions already. If you think of like graphic designers, we already see, I mean, that's a creative role, right? But already these systems can displace some of that work just by image generation. So it's, nothing is a sure thing, but certainly creativity is one thing. The other one, and probably the most important area for college educated white collar people, is to really embrace roles that involve building relationships with other people, right? Sophisticated understanding and relationship building with other people. So think of a nurse, right? And the need to have relationships with patients, to have empathy. Or maybe a business consultant where you really need to understand another person or another group of people in order to come up with solutions to a particular problem. But it has to be, I'm not talking about just being friendly and smiling at people like a customer service role. I mean, really having in-depth, sophisticated interactions, right? But again, of course, AI is also getting better than that. So none of this is saying this is going to be true forever. I'm just saying for the foreseeable future, I think these are the kinds of areas where you want to focus. And then, of course, the third area is the thing that I think most people have realized now, is that maybe the safest jobs of all are going to be skilled trade jobs like a plumber or electrician. And the reason is that these are jobs that require a lot of mobility, dexterity, problem solving in very, very unpredictable environments, right? So if you're a plumber, every time you arrive at a new workplace to fix something, it's different, right? It's completely novel, and you're dealing with rusty pipes and all of this stuff. Building a robot that could do those kinds of jobs, I think, is still science fiction. I mean, I'm not saying it won't happen. I think someday it probably will happen, but it would involve like in Star Wars, you had the robot C-3PO, the golden robot that can basically do anything like a human, right? That's what we would literally need in order to automate jobs like a plumber or electrician or a nurse, right? A nurse, actually, if you wanted me to name the number one job that is probably safest, I would say probably a nurse, because it has all the same qualities as a plumber or an electrician, plus, a college education and the ability to solve problems, plus the need for empathy and really building a relationship with patients. Plus, of course, the fact that there's going to be increased demand because, we have an aging population. Put all those things together, and I would say, being a nurse might be the number one safest job to have in all of this. So, I mean,
I mean,
I'm sorry.
well, let me interrupt with that. It would be nice if they were actually going to be giving loans to people who go into nursing.
Yeah, that's for sure. And the thing
That's the
is, one of the
catch.
reasons we always have a shortage of nurses is that there aren't enough nursing schools and there aren't enough nursing teachers, because if you're going to teach nursing, you can, in many cases, make a lot more money by being a nurse, right? So I think that's part of what creates the bottleneck.
Yep.
So there may well be opportunities to use artificial intelligence, right, to really amplify, for example, the number of nurses that we can train, and maybe to make it more affordable, right? I mean, obviously, you still need to have real world instruction, in a real environment, but maybe AI can really help with that. That might be one of the most promising uses of the technology, I mean, and that's one thing I should say. It's not my intention to be very negative about this. I mean, I definitely believe AI is going to be instrumental in helping us solve, the problems that we really need to solve, whether it's, climate change or medical advances, solving global poverty. I mean, I think AI has tremendous potential for all of these things, but I think we need to be realistic about the potential economic and job market impact, and we really need to start thinking about how we can adapt to that so that we can really embrace this technology and get the most out of it going forward.
Your story with the plumber and how difficult it is to automate makes me think I live in an old house. It's built in 1807. And suffice to say, every room is different. Every measurement is non-standard. The basement is this like medieval dungeon. So we brought in some contractors to try to work on insulating the basement to, reduce our heating bill in the winter. And the natural thing would be to spray insulation foam all over. And that's what some companies would offer. But we had someone who had a lot of experience with older houses, and he said, you have a lot of crawl spaces. If we insulate this room that you see, there will be areas where pipes are going through that are no longer receiving the ambient heat. So by insulating one room, you may expose other pipes to the risk of freezing and bursting. And it's such a simple thought once he mentioned it, but I could easily see the kind of thing where you bring in your AI robots and they insulate a room and they know how to change a pipe, and they end up causing a lot of harm and, irreparable damage because there's all these more intuitional aspects to the job that we just, maybe Google and OpenAI just don't think of these things when they try to automate. So that really physical hands-on experience and knowledge, I think it's just so important. And it's one of these things where from the outside, you think, oh, plumbing, you just replace some pipes. We'll figure out how to automate that.
Right.
But this
No,
was a real wake up to me. Like, no, there's so much broader to this.
right.
So my punchline takeaway from this is I will accept that AGI has arrived when I can get a robot to insulate my house and not burst my pipes.
Right.
That's my bar.
And, that's an interesting perspective. Some people would say in order to be AGI, it really needs to be able to control a physical robot, right? And like a human. Other people might set a somewhat lower standard and say it needs to be able to do anything a white collar worker can do, right? In the virtual world, in online, and working with information. So I think that lower level is certainly coming first. I mean, physical robots, as you say, in doing these really unpredictable things, like you just described, I think that's a bit further off. And Elon Musk is working on the Optimus robot, and there are lots of companies doing humanoid robots. But actually, to be honest, I'm quite skeptical that I mean, these robots are going to be expensive, right? $30,000, more or less like buying a car. And people would, if they spend that much money, they're going to expect a lot. And just, the challenge of robotic dexterity. I mean, human beings are extraordinarily good biological robots, right? In terms of our ability to manipulate our environment. And robots are just not there yet. And I think it's going to take quite a while. But I do think it will happen, but it might be quite far in the future.
It is a funny thought to think that we're building all this technology to do human labor and things more inexpensively. And if we end up with like $100,000 robot, we're going to be paying humans to like clean for it and maintain it. We're going to be the servants for the expensive robots rather than the other way around.
Right. But I think in time, all these technologies will get cheaper, more affordable. I mean, AI could well end up being commoditized. Robots are harder, right? Because it's a physical machine. But over time, as the robot factories scale up and you get economies of scale, I mean, the robots will also fall in price.
There was a part of your book that really leapt out at me, and I don't want to give it away, so just want you to share it with readers. You have this amazing thought experiment about aliens. If you know what I mean, can you tell us about that?
Right. Basically, I'm trying to explain what happens if people lose their job and they don't have money to spend in the economy, right? And so what I did was I said, imagine these aliens arrive from outer space, and these are a really strange, species of creature. All they want, their motivation is just to work. That makes them happy. That makes them fulfilled, and they don't have any other desires, right? So they're very different from human beings. As long as they're working, doing something useful, they're happy. And now they need, some sort of basic food to sustain them, right? But that's about it. They don't consume. They're not interested in having a house to live in. They just sleep standing up where they work. They're not interested in consumer stuff, or travel or any experience. All they do is work all day, right? And I said, what happens if these aliens arrive and they're highly intelligent and capable, and so they start to take all the jobs, right? Businesses say, hey, I'm going to get rid of my human workers who aren't anywhere near as good as these aliens who are willing to work for free. I don't have to pay them a salary. I just have to provide them the work. That's all that they care about. And I got to, provide some basic food for them so that they can keep working. But what happens over time is that the aliens would consume almost all the jobs, but no one is getting paid, right? I mean, they're not drawing a salary, and then the aliens have no desire to consume, to buy anything. So in theory, you've got aliens doing all the production, but, in economic terms, in the context of a market economy, you're going to shut down production because there are no customers, right? I mean, it doesn't matter how robotic a factory is. If there are no customers buying what that factory is producing, you're going to shut it down, right? I mean, you can't keep operating and just have the gadgets you're producing just pile up, okay? And that's even more immediately true of a service business, because services, you can't inventory services, right? They're consumed at the moment they are produced, right? And so if you're offering an accounting service and suddenly no one wants accountants, then you stop, right? You can't continue to produce. So one of the things that I found is that as people think about this issue of AI, they focus too much purely on the production side of the economy, producing things. Okay, fine, that's true. AI can make us a lot better at producing things, but we also have to have a balance of consumption, right? We can't produce things if there's no customer for it. And the customers in our current economic paradigm, the customers, the consumers, the people that purchase products and services are fueled by salaries and wages, right? I mean, that's where they get their money to buy stuff. For most people, not everyone, but for most people. And that's really kind of the single most important thing maybe that I've really tried to focus on in all my writing. And I think that, I mean, the reason I do that is I want more people thinking about that and how it's going to work out in the future.
Yeah, that alien story really made me think, in a way, what we're running the risk of doing is using automation to massively scale up supply while leaving demand untouched.
Right,
and
right.
that just doesn't work. You don't balance.
Right.
Demand has to go
It
up
doesn't
with
make
supply.
sense.
Now, to wrap up, I'm curious, what things should we be thinking about in the future with AI, and what does that future look like for listeners?
Well, I think for sure these systems, the LLMs, Claude and ChatGPT and Google's Gemini, are going to continue to progress relentlessly. I mean, the thing that's driving that is the incredible level of competition between these companies. I mean, it's just off the scale how competitive they are. They're racing, literally, and the people that they have hired to do this are just extraordinary in terms of their level of talent and their capability. So without question, this is going to continue to progress relentlessly. I do believe we will get to the point where we will see labor being displaced, and it will become fairly obvious. I don't know when that will be, how long that will take. It could happen quite soon. It could take longer, but I think it's inevitable. But of course, that's not the only thing going on. AI is going to bring tremendous benefits, right? We're going to see medical breakthroughs. I mean, the most exciting thing we've seen to date is AlphaFold, right? Which is Google's system that figured out protein folding, which is revolutionary. I mean, that's how Demis Hassabis got a Nobel Prize, right? And you're going to see more breakthroughs like that across the board, not just in medicine, but in many areas. And that's going to be fantastic news for everyone. So definitely is not, I'm not here to be negative on AI and say we should stop AI or anything like that. I'm saying we need to figure out how to adapt to it and how to especially adapt to the impact on jobs and the economy when that begins to unfold.
What struck me rereading this book in 2026 is how much the grounds have shifted for people who said in 2015, don't worry, new jobs will emerge. And a huge thank you to Martin Ford for joining us and helping us unpack what automation, AI, and a changing economy might mean towards the future of work. And as always, keep questioning the numbers, systems, and assumptions that are shaping our world. We'll see you next time on Breaking Math.